Today, I'm going to share with you 5 outside-of-the-box books that changed my art, changed my performances, and ultimately changed my acting career. Now, I'm not saying these books are going to do the exact same thing for you, but what I'm hoping is that maybe 1 or 2 of these books will start to get you to think in a different way, start to get you to listen to your voice, trust your process, and ultimately speak your truth, because that's what they were able to do for me. Hey artists, my name's Hans Christopher. I am an actor, coach, and creator of the Working Actor series. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Don't forget to download your free 3-step memorization technique at the link below. And with that, let's dive in. Today's lesson is 5 non-acting books that transformed my acting or my art. So hopefully they can do the same for you. Let's just jump in. So the first book, and I think you guys will probably all be familiar with this book. If you're not, this should be a staple in every artist, every actor's bookshelf or pantry next to their bed. It's The Artist's Way. I had all the books in my head. No, they're right here. The Artist's Way. If you guys haven't read The Artist's Way, this is it right here. It is... Let me focus this really quick. This guy right here, The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron. It is, I've probably read it 4 or 5 times. I also have listened to it a couple times. It is fantastic. It is something that really connected me to that child artist that I talk about, to understanding, listening, hearing, and allowing that kind of child in you, that child artist, which is kind of your source for creativity, to explore, to heal, to speak, to have fun, and create, because that's kind of the source of creation, I believe, at least, and I think she does. And it was absolutely imperative to the way that I worked, and to really, I think you'll hear a lot of actors or artists talk about this. If they get into a rut or they start burning out, they're like, I need to go back and read Artist's Way. I need to start doing my pages again, which is something that was a process for me that was unbelievable. Pages, which was writing 3 pages of kind of uninterrupted thought without judgment, just allowing yourself to speak, ended up turning into my gratitude journaling, ended up turning into a process that I do gratitude with my left hand every morning. So it's transformed into this thing that all came from The Artist's Way. And now if you end up doing The Artist's Way, another thing that ended up happening is through the process of, it's called Morning Pages, it led me to finding out about the website 750 Words. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but it's an extension of the pages. Writing 3 pages equals to about 750 words. Somebody created a website called 750 Words. I believe it's 750words.com. I'll link it to the site afterwards. But what it does is it allows you to have a space where you can write 750 words. And when it's finished, it'll say done. It congratulates you. You build some awards. But even more importantly, what ends up happening is it will give you key words and ways that you're talking about yourself. So if you talk about yourself in a sad way, if that inner voice tends to be angry, tends to be a little selfish, like this is the case for me, I ended up being very selfish in the way that I was thinking, which I think a lot of us are. But what it did for me is it started to get me to shift into thinking about things in the sense of a we versus an I, which really changed my judgment, changed how harsh I was and critical of myself, and in turn, those around me. So it's a fantastic tool. If you decide to dive into The Artist's Way, I suggest testing out 750 Words. It's an amazing tool to kind of bring that child artist out and allow him to play and figure things out and cultivate that creativity that we're all looking for as artists. So that's the first book. The second book is a book that has nothing to do with acting, but at the same time, everything to do with acting. This is the one that I lent out, and I've bought probably 6 versions of this and given it out and lent out. It's called The Inner Game of Tennis. You might have heard Tom Brady talk about it. You might have heard, you've probably heard a lot of athletes and people talk about it. But The Inner Game of Tennis is a book that the reason why for an artist or an actor I believe it's so important is it's really not a book about tennis. It's more a book about productivity and a book about being able to differentiate the chatter of your mind versus playing, being, right? And I think it's incredibly important in the process of auditioning and performing how to differentiate that director speak versus that child artist that we're talking about. And some of the concepts in that book, he talks about, I think it's type A versus type B. I've turned it into the director and the artist, is absolutely amazing if you start putting it in context of like the audition process. I'll give you an example. In the Inner Game of Tennis, he talks about teaching tennis to students or people. And he says what ends up happening is the more things you put on top of people, the more lessons you're teaching people, right? So think of it in terms of acting. The more you're going to acting classes and learning different methods and learning different techniques, the more you take that into your audition, the harder it is going to be to audition. You're going to be in your head, and the more you're in your head, the less you are able to live, create, be truthful, and you'll feel it. The more you take classes and you try to implement that into the work that you're doing, it's going to feel harder. It's going to feel like you're stiff. So one example in the book he talks about is while you learn these lessons, you do these things, when you get into playing, actually playing the game, or in this terms auditioning or being on set, you want to focus on one thing in particular. In tennis, he talks about focusing on the spin of the ball, and taking all your thoughts and just focusing on looking at the spin of the ball and trusting that your lessons you've learned, the practices you're doing, are just going to be showing up. If you're thinking about how to hit the ball, if you're thinking about how to audition properly, if you're thinking about trying to do a certain thing, trying to emote a certain way, you're going to be doing the opposite of playing. You're going to be doing the opposite of just living in the moment. So I go back to this book all the time, especially when I start to feel a little stale in my audition process, to try and find ways to make it more alive. That concept of listening, when I told you in the audition process of a great way to jump into the moment and snap yourself into what's going on, is to just look at the reader and say, did you hear that? And then really listen. Is just like the concept of watching the ball. Taking something and turning it into a moment that allows you to connect with your reader in real time is an unbelievable way and skill. And you can do that with a ton of different things. I think I have a list of like 15 ways to try and drop into the moment or do that. And all of that came from, Timothy Galway's Inner Game of Tennis. A lot of these books have nothing to do with acting, but if you take the meaning out of it and put acting in its place, they can be incredible. So that's book 2. Book 3 for me was one of the best books I think I've ever read on diving into the character of something. And it has nothing to do with acting, but also everything to do with acting. The book is called The Peregrine by J.A. Baker. It is a book about a man who studies and follows around the peregrine falcon. It's one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read in my life. So it's almost like poetry. I talk about that thing, art feeding the artist. For me, this book for about 6 months became one of the most inspirational. I started writing poetry because of this book. I had never written poetry before. I started thinking in a different way. But most importantly, this book, because of this guy follows a falcon for an entire year, he starts his writing in a way that is so elegant and beautiful. And by the end of the book, he's transformed the way he thinks, the way he acts, the way he sees into basically what the falcon sees. And it's such a great lesson for understanding what it takes to see through the eyes of something else and become a character, especially when it's something you're not really understanding. To just try and play a serial killer or somebody that's so far outside of yourself and jump into that can be very inauthentic. But if you take an approach like this guy did with learning about the peregrine and obsessing about the peregrine and seeing life in the world through the eyes of this bird, but in terms of, if we're putting on an actor, in terms of putting our lives in our eyes of another person, putting ourselves in the shoes of this person and thinking in a way that's outside of what I, Hans, think, and really allowing myself to live truthfully through this other thing, it's unbelievable what ends up happening with him and what ends up the journey he goes through. But it's just such a great lesson for diving into the world of character and meaning making from a perspective you aren't connected with. It's unbelievable. So that's my number 3 book. The number 4 book that I would say that is something that was so beautiful for me, and I'll explain first why I think it's so important. In art, in what we do, especially in the process of being judged and failing and falling on our face, and there's even, it goes farther than that, the process of aging and death and not wanting to look bad. I ended up finding this book, and the book is the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is the person that has all those amazing quotes. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And he has some other unbelievable books as far as way to live and how to kind of propel yourself in your life. But for me, the reason why this translated to me as an artist so much is I found in my work the concept of needing or wanting something so bad, wanting a role so bad, wanting to get to a place so bad, wanting to book my first co-star, then my first guest star, then my first series regular. This sense of desire or longing or clinging or pulling, it's the thing that's going to prevent you from getting it. When you try and pull, you try and grab things, it's only going to push that thing away. And the concept is what's so beautiful about, Taoism is it's the art of letting go. Really what it is if you go back into where it came from, you had Confucianism, which was the art of living or how to live, and it had this marriage with Taoism that was so beautiful, which is the art of letting go. And it was an amazing transformation for how to die peacefully, how to let go of these things that you cling on to. And for us as actors, that process of letting go and clearing the way opens us up to be able to live presently, live in the moment. When you can take that longing and that desire away, that child artist gets to come out and you can start to do some amazing things. So that for me was an amazing lesson. The Tao Te Ching, I just read a little kind of stanza every day, and it's carried over into a lot of things. There's a lecture that I'll share with you guys by Alan Watts. It's The Art of Letting Go, Wu Wei, and I think it's a fantastic concept to take in on the day of an audition. This art of this practice of not forcing and not pushing, just allowing whatever is there to come and be, and not be judgmental with it, and just allow yourself to be. I think that is an imperative way to treat the day of the audition. And the Tao Te Ching is one of the things that got me thinking in that way. So I'll add that. And then one final thing, and I debated which ones to do it, but I wanted to add something that was a little different here. Something that was amazing for me in developing, showing up strong in the room for auditions, in networking, in relationships, was a book called The Charisma Myth. If you guys haven't read that, it's a fantastic book that kind of works from the outside in. And what you'll find is, from doing things just like power posing before you go into an audition, or putting yourself in a certain state, or just keeping your shoulders back and standing in a certain position, it'll start to fire endorphins and things in a different way that exuberate kind of confidence, strength, charisma, and ways to connect, and really, even more importantly, to listen. Because charisma is actually more about listening. Jeff Goldblum taught one of the classes, it was a long time ago. Jeff Goldblum taught one of the classes, and I don't think this came from him. This obviously came from someone else, but he said, somebody asked him, how do I get more interesting on camera? I feel like I'm not very interesting. And he said, if you want to be interested, or if you want to be interesting, you have to be interested. And that always stuck with me as like, oh man, how do I make it, in my scene, in my audition, how do I become more interested? focusing on the reader and making the reader more significant, more important. And that concept came from the Charisma Myth for me. So that book is something that is, I have as an audiobook, and I'll listen to it probably once every year or two, just to kind of remind me to do certain things. There's also other things I do, like the process of just banging on your chest can evoke a certain thing before I do an audition or before I go into a room that gives me more command, more presence, more authority, more masculinity, and vice versa. There's other tools I can do physically to try and get into a certain energetic kind of way. One of the things that I do that works really well for me, and this didn't come from the Charisma Myth, but this is just kind of a side thing that made me think of it, was in some of my auditions, I'll just grab a pillow or something to hold and put my head into, especially things that have a lot of emotional depth, and I'll go through the motions of kind of convulsing and doing this thing to get me in that emotional state. And what I'll find is my body reacts and remembers, and then I'll bring my prep work into that. And that idea of working from the outside in positions and doing things like that came from the Charisma Myth and came from practicing things in that. So that is my list of 5 books, non-acting books that have transformed my career. With that, I'll open up to some questions if you got anything. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and let me know what book you plan to read first in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll see you next time.